to our legacy series. This is part 4 this week. We're excited to have a couple of great guests with us today. Real quick, if you've been with us the last 3 weeks, you understand that each year at Nations of Coaches, we like to host our annual Legacy Summit. Well, this year, because of many circumstances that we're all living under, we could not host that event down in Atlanta at Chick-fil-A headquarters, but we've been able to bring you a legacy series. And today we're excited to wrap up that series with part 4. You've heard from Coach Rick Barnes at Tennessee, Clark Kellogg from CBS, and of course, Pastor Donnell Jones, chaplain of the NABC. And this week we're excited to bring you 2 really terrific guests. I'll go ahead and introduce them, but first, 2 quick instructions. We've got several coaches on the line, participants today. As always, coaches, we want you to participate with Q&A. Get involved. If you've got questions for Coach Donovan and Scott here in a second, use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom. Many of you are familiar with this process already. Pull that up, type in a question, and we'll try to get it to these guys throughout the interview here. The chat feature, use that as well. We'd love to connect with you if we haven't already. If there's any way that we can serve you guys out there at Nations of Coaches, we'd love to be able to do that. So let's get going here today with our webinar. And we've got a couple of great guests, like I've mentioned. First of all, we would like to welcome Coach Billy Donovan, head coach of the Oklahoma City Thunder. And with him today would be Scott Whitaker, founder, coach, pastor, impactor, but the founder of Impact for Living. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Glad to be with you, sir.
Absolutely. So happy we could have you guys with us. You know, we've had quite a series here talking about, we've really focused on leaving a legacy. That's something that we're passionate about here at Nations of Coaches, and leaving that legacy of excellence with the players and the people around us, our families. And that's going to be a theme that we'll talk about some here today with you 2 gentlemen. But this is a unique time. We've never had just one, 2 speakers, 2 guests on our program. We've always had one, but you 2 have a unique relationship. Let me first start with Coach Donovan. Excited to have you here with us today, but Coach, what do the last 2 or 3 months look like for you? Obviously, coaching in the NBA now after a great historic college career, but what's that look like the last couple months with the season coming to an abrupt pause, not end, but a pause? So what do the last couple months look like for you?
Well, I think what happened with really the country being shut down, and for us, I think as the NBA, I was part of the game against the Utah Jazz when the season had gotten shut down, and that was in the beginning of March. And at that time, really not knowing what was going to transpire going forward. And then the league had come out and said that they were going to evaluate things over a 30-day period, and obviously that continually got pushed back. It's been really different. I'm sure I'm no different than anybody else. The biggest thing for me is I think that we've learned now how to communicate through Zooms and Teams, trying to stay connected with coaching staff, front office, players. You're not allowed to be in the gym, a lot of variables. Probably the biggest challenge for me is I think when the season's going on, you're always able to get into kind of a pretty good routine, for yourself. But in a lot of ways, your routine was really, really disrupted because so many times things are taking place, where it's phone calls or Zoom calls at different times of the day, and you're trying to find ways to be productive and live in a situation that's been unlike anything I don't think any of us have ever lived through. So it's been challenging, but I think in these times you get a chance to learn a little bit more about yourself. You find different ways to communicate. And then, I think the biggest thing is, how do you as a person continue to try to find ways to grow and get better?
Oh, that's good. And we'll come back to that some too, Coach, because I'd love to dig in, what some of those things are that you've been able to dig into. That's good. Scott, how about you? Tell us, tell us a little bit more about Scott Whitaker. I mean, Billy Donovan's out in the press a little bit, gets the spotlight some, but man, our conversations, the ones we've had here recently, you've done a lot of things, man. Tell us a little bit more about Scott Whitaker.
Well, first of all, it's nice not to be out in the press quite as much as Billy is. That's a good thing. I'm been married to my bride for 53 years, Linda. I have a son, Nathan, who you probably know has written a lot of books with Coach Dungy and James Brown, and one with Tim Tebow, and then a daughter-in-law, Amy, and two granddaughters, Hannah, who's a senior at the University of Florida, and Ellie, who is to be a junior in high school this coming year. Been all over the country as a child, had a different childhood. That's a story for another day. But it's been interesting how God has used me in different ways and brought me to different things. Went to a member of the United States Air Force during the Vietnam period. Got out, went to college, studied mathematics, taught for a year, ended up going to law school, practiced law for a number of years, still do as a senior counsel of the firm, but use that as a background to help work with coaches and represent coaches with my son through the years. But God led me all the time through to things, and all of it was about ministry, and there's always that calling on my life to touch a life in front of me. So I do that now on a regular basis. I try to do that now. That's the calling of my life. And Impact for Living, we started a number of years ago. And Billy and Christine have been very supportive of that. And it's been a part of what we try to do. He actually doesn't take credit for it and laughs all the time, but we do a devotional call Tuesday mornings, which started one day when Billy and I were having a Bible study in his house, in his office there. I don't know, back in the 10, 11 years ago. And he said, boy, I got a couple of guys that would love to hear what we're talking about here. Could you start a telephone conference call? I said, sure. 2 weeks later, we did that, had 2 guys and 3 guys, 4 guys, 6 guys. And this last Tuesday, there were 120 guys on the call around the country. And it goes anywhere from that to more. We do a devotional on Monday morning that started with 2 or 3 folks called Thoughts, just some early morning thoughts from me to you. And those now go out to over 2,000 people on Monday morning. We have the website that we've redone as well, and you can get them on there. So just a lot of different things. We're expanding that. Try to be available to anybody who maybe needs an ear to listen to.
Great. And we're going to come back to that, because I think people would look at this program here and go, okay, what's the connection here? Coach Billy Donovan, Scott Whitaker, what does this look like? And so I'll throw it back to you, Coach. Where did you and Scott meet? What did that look like? What were the circumstances there? And, just take it from there. Where did you guys meet, when, and how did it go from there?
Well, the first time I met Scott was a mutual friend of ours was getting married, and Scott was the pastor, and the marriage took place in Scott's backyard. And first met Scott there a little bit, spent some time, but I think it speaks to maybe his intuition a little bit. I think, like all of us, and I've talked about this before, in different points in time, at Florida, and certainly trying to find, a meaning of what you're doing in coaching, because so much of it can be result orientated, result based. And for me, having a chance to be part of 2 national championships, you kind of look back and you sit there and say, okay, were those other seasons, really, not worthwhile? Did they not mean anything? What do you take? What is really your responsibility? And, really, why did I get into coaching? And I think as a young coach, starting off in my mid-20s and then becoming a head coach at 28, you're certainly trying to prove yourself, and, you want to be successful, but you start to, I think, really start to delve into, as time goes on, like, what is really the meaning of all this, and what is my responsibility, as a coach. I don't think I ever really felt like I lost my identity to that, but the one thing I always refer back to is probably some of the most influential people in my life have been coaches. And I was always struck by the way, Dean Smith, John Wooden, the way their former players had talked about them as coaches, and the impact not only on the floor, but away from the floor they had as coaches on them. And I would say the same thing was true for my high school coach, Coach Pitino. They had an incredible impact on my life. And I think Scott came by my office one day and we sat down and we spoke. And, he helped me from a contract standpoint, because he's got a background in law, and he really helped me there. But really, I think our conversations grew more on a spiritual level. and really developed, I think, a very, very close relationship over a number of years. And, he and I would do Bible study before, games. At home, we, talked regularly. I think he was someone that was really impactful in my growth in the spiritual side of myself, my faith, helping me understand God's word a lot more, taking time to talk to me, about, leadership from the standpoint of being a Christian, all those kind of things. So our relationship all the way back then, as Scott said, whatever it was 10, 12, 15 years ago, has kind of evolved into obviously a very, very close relationship today.
That's great. And Scott, from your perspective, how does that play out, or what does that look like? Obviously, meeting Billy, was it intentional, or was it just happenstance that you decided to build a relationship with Coach Donovan?
Well, I'll say this because Billy knows it and he's heard me say it and he knows it publicly. But I was sitting in the airport in Grand Rapids one day, and a dear friend of his, one of his assistant coaches, called me and said, "Hey, could you stick your head in and go by and see Billy? Just I think he needs somebody to talk to." And that was it. So I did, and I knew him. He knew me, just on the edges, being at the University of Florida. But from that point on, we just developed a relationship and he said I represent him, but that's just because one day he said, "Hey, you can do this. Can you help me with this?" And I said, "Sure." But that's over here on the side where my relationship with Billy really lies is just in our relationship, trust, spiritual growth together. And so that just developed and began to grow in that regard. He is to watch him grow over these last 2008, 2007, somewhere in there. It has been amazing to watch and just see the impact he's had and start to have as we all do. And I learned a lot in the process too, but as we recognize the impact that we're supposed to have and that God calls us to, he says in Rome, the Apostle Paul says in Romans 8:28, I know the good, he's going to do good for you because all those you love. And that doesn't mean a W on the scoreboard. Or that doesn't mean a W on the scoreboard at all times. And Billy gets that and he understands that. And he really does a great job, I think, of mentoring by example. Some of the young coaches saying who are out there climbing ladders to get to the top and realize when they get to the top, it isn't there. Realize that the real fulfillment in life is turning back to God and leaning into those priorities that God wants us to lead. So it's been a great journey just to watch him grow and as both of us have and learn more about what God wants us to do in life. And we pray together a lot. And one of the things we pray about is that God would show us that we would not miss the miracles that are happening in the game that may have nothing to do with the game itself, but little things, somebody watching his attitude and the way he handles himself on the court. And I've heard folks talk about that before, what a difference he made in their lives just watching him handle himself. So, anyway.
That's really good. Really good. The one thing I hear in there is, and Coach, you said it, that your relationship grew through these spiritual conversations. Over time, it just matured and got deeper and deeper and deeper. And, it's also one of the things too at Nations of Coaches is we build relationship and pour into coaches or across the country and student athletes that we're building those kind of relationships to get to those kind of conversations. It's really good. You can see the transformation take place there. It's really good. There's a lot of directions we can go, but let me go back to Coach for a second. Obviously, after a fantastic coaching career at the college level, moving on to the professional level, the NBA level, having an impact directly on those college student athletes versus coaching the professional player. I know I'm probably asking the question for a lot of coaches on the call here today. What's the biggest difference and how are you able to maybe impact and help shape and mold some of your young NBA players or seasoned veterans, but what are some ways you right now are able to impact their lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. It's the NBA in college is totally different. It's a totally different experience. I've been fortunate enough to be able to learn a great deal in college, and I've learned a great deal in the NBA. But I still think, like we talked about before, it still comes down to relationship. These players, although they're mega stars and people see them on TV and look at them as stars, they're still human beings. There's still things that are important to them as people, and their relationships are important. And I think in the NBA, it's different from this perspective. I think that when you take a high school player that's coming out of high school and he's leaving home for the first time, he's leaving his family for the first time, he's walking into a college campus for the first time, he's coming really around new teammates, in college. It's a new coaching staff. The environment's totally different, and there's really a growth and a development in there at a really young age. I think for the NBA players, they've already experienced all those things. There's really pretty much not much that they have not already experienced in the game. And I think that the NBA players, because of their age and because of the amount of time and length of time they played the game, there's a wealth of knowledge and experience that you can draw upon. I look at my first year coming into the NBA, I had not coached a game in the NBA. So a Russell Westbrook, a Kevin Durant, guys that have been in the league for 6, 7, 8 years. Nick Collison at that time, I think, was in the league for maybe 12 years. Some of these guys have played between 600 and 1,000 NBA games. I hadn't coached one. So I think that what you want to do is you really want to draw upon those players' experiences. You want to be able to partner with them. And then you want to be able to try to bring value to them, as a team and as individuals. You want to try to put them in situations to be successful. But there's just a lot more world experiences that the NBA player has than a college player would have. So much, I think, of an NBA player is, they know what it's like to lose by 30 points. They know what it's like to be really humbled in a game. They know what it's like to win. They understand the pitfalls of being able to handle success. They understand how to bounce back from failure. They understand, that adversity can be an incredible driving force for them to grow and get better. These are things they already know. And I think a college player is kind of going through that process of learning those things. So, 82 games, we got a young player, Terrence Ferguson, who's a great young man. He's been in the league, he's in his 3rd year. But like for somebody like him that's been through it, even just for 1 year in the NBA, he's been in a large part, one of our best perimeter defenders. So like it's every night for him. It's Damian Lillard one night. It's Paul George another night. It's Steph Curry. It's James Harden. These games keep coming, and the talent level is so incredibly high that the biggest thing is I think college players learn how to get themselves ready to play. These guys understand how to get ready to play, and they know how to get themselves ready. And it's really a remarkable thing to watch, because you're talking about in some situations playing 4 times in a week against the best players in the world. So they've got a wealth of experience and knowledge. They're really smart. They're very, very serious, about their careers. I think people see a lot of these guys on the court performing, but the thing that's most impressive is what they do off the floor in terms of the way they take care of themselves, the way they eat, the way they lift, the time of the day that they get up, the routines that they establish. I would say that it's really, really hard, unless you're super, super, super talented. It's really, really hard to play in the NBA if you do not have a great internal drive. You're not really highly competitive. And there's also, I think, a great deal of humility that comes with understanding that, there's going to be a lot that all these guys are going to learn.
That's really interesting, that word you just said, that ingredient of humility. I think a lot of people watch the NBA and look at the wide array of different types of players and say, at least those I think that are outside the game would say, well, they don't have much humility, those kind of things. But I think you really hit on something, and it's a characteristic that makes a leader great in any field, whether it's athletics, corporation, whatever it might be, is that degree of humility that I've got to stay on task, on edge, take care of myself, serve others, do all these different things to really compete at that kind of level. That's a really key component.
Yeah, I mean, and when I think sometimes, and Scott and I have talked a lot about this, just from a spiritual standpoint, humility doesn't mean being soft or passive or anything else like that. It's just an awareness that their talent is not a curse to them, where they think they can just show up and utilize their talent. They understand there's a lot more that goes into it. It was a great story. We were playing on an East Coast road swing, and we were gone for maybe a week or 8 days. And we had played, I think, a double overtime game against Brooklyn. And we had gotten back into Oklahoma City at the end of the trip at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and we had off that day. I had come into the office later in the afternoon, and it was maybe like 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. And, Chris Paul had called me, and I could hear something in the background. I'm like, "Where are you?" He says, "I'm in the facility." And I said, "I'm in my office." So I went back there to talk to him. I'm like, "What are you doing?" He says, "No, I came in to get a lift. I'm going to go through cold tank therapy. I'm going to get in the sauna." But like the attention to detail that he knows that there's a game coming the next night, and he knows he has to get himself prepared. And he has a level of understanding of what goes into having to do that. And he just does not skip steps. Now, he's obviously a very gifted, talented, great basketball player, but he would not be at that level if he was skipping steps, and he's never skipped steps.
That's really good. Wow. And great insight. We get a little glimpse of, for those of us that aren't privy to that, we get a little glimpse of one of the best players in the world and what he does to prepare. That in itself is a leadership lesson right there. That's really good. So Scott, back to you for a second. You know, your organization, Impact for Living, we come back to this idea of we're coming in, we're speaking into the lives of coaches, men, things like that. You've got a little bit of what you call the 4 Ps. If you don't mind, I'd like you to unpack those just a little bit, but it talks about purpose, potential, passion, and platform. What does that look like in the world of mentoring?
Let me go back to something Billy said, especially for these guys online coaches. He will never toot his own horn, as you know. But let me tell you something. The thing that he does so well, we all know he knows X's and O's, and I go to practices and watch when he was here, and know that he'll ask me when he needs my help with plays for 9 guys, since I'm a baseball coach. So he never asked me for out there, but it's interesting to watch. He knows what he's doing out there. But here's the key to him: is his relationship with players and making a difference in their lives. That I think, and Billy, I hope you don't mind me saying, that was one of the struggles he had in college and NBA, because he knew in college he was making a difference in their lives. So it was a struggle, and that's where he wants to be. NBA, and everybody thinks one day in the NBA, but the reality for Billy is that he wanted to be where he could have the biggest impact, where he could make a difference. And he did that for a number of years in college, had an opportunity in the NBA, had opportunities before that, and didn't feel like that was the right spot for him. And that's all great organizations, but just wasn't the right spot at the right time. But there it was. And that's what he's all about. And when players get that about him, you can see what he can do with them and moving them from where they are to becoming more, not only as a basketball player, but as a person. So I just want to make sure folks, as coaches listening in, focus on their relationship. This man does that. He does that every day, not just on the court, not just with players, but with staff, with other folks. And that's why he's loved, and that's why he's respected and appreciated out there. Impact for Living. A number of years ago, God just kind of laid on my heart one day. I was pastor at a local Methodist church, and left believing that God wanted me to do some other things, and sitting there one night and put these thoughts on my mind. I made some notes on a piece of paper, and eventually, after a number of sessions with that, came out with an idea that we're created at this time in history. God knew what this time in history was going to be like when he made us. Jeremiah 1:5, for I know the plan. Jeremiah 1:5, I knit you. I knew what your purpose would be when I knit you in the womb. And he knew what the world was going to be like then. And he placed us there to have the impact that only we can have, but leave the legacy that only we can leave. And it's not a legacy that we look at the end of our lives. It's a legacy that we realize that we're leaving today. When this day is over, that's the legacy we left. And so we want to be very cognizant and aware of that every day of our lives, every moment of our lives, to leave, be who all God wants us to be, and touch the lives around us, and leave an imprint on the lives around us he brings. the way we, it's not meant to be formulaic, but the way we have the impact that we're meant to have and leave the legacy day by day that we're meant to leave is done by maximizing our 4 Ps. And it's not a formula, it's just maximizing, being aware of our purpose. What's our purpose in life? And maybe something as simple as love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, your neighbor as yourself, as Luke 27, then Jesus goes on to tell the story of the Good Samaritan. There's a purpose, whatever that is, and we wrestle with that all the time. What's our purpose? What purpose of honor God? Our passion. As a child, we have all these incredible passions, these things we do. And society tends to pour cold water on those over the years, not knowing what they're doing, saying, well, that's a good idea, but, and all these passions are still these God-ordained passions that he gave us. And so one of the things we do is have folks reach back in there and see, what are those things that excite you? What are those aha moments that you see in life? What are the things that you would do in life? I have a thing on my desk that my bride gave me years ago. What would you do in life if you, right here, paperweight, what would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail? And the other question is, what would you do if you didn't need to be paid? If money wasn't an object? What are those aha moments? Those are the passions. And then the potential in our lives. God created each one of us unlike anybody else. I have gifts that nobody else has. Billy has gifts that nobody else has. Ted, you do that nobody else has. And the sad part about it is too often we go through life and never realize what those gifts are, the abilities to use for God's glory and for other people. And then the last one is the platform. We stand on a lot of different platforms. And I try to get coaches and other folks to understand that different roles they have in life as a husband, as a father, as a grandfather, as a coach, as a friend, all sorts of different platforms we have. The idea is to maximize, to be aware of them, and then to maximize them, use God's glory and impacting others along the way. That's a long answer to a shorter to your question, but that fleshes it out a little bit for you, I hope.
Absolutely. No, and I wanted you to, because I read that and read about it and studied a little bit, and I just found those to be really, really good, very powerful. And that last one, like we talk about, and like we talk about all the time at Nations of Coaches, that platform, the calling, the higher calling on the role of a coach. And you can say especially today, or you can say, but any point in time, so many of us were influenced, good, bad, or otherwise, by a coach in our lives. And so it's so critical for that coach who's speaking into the lives of young men, young women, to have things right, have things figured out. Not perfect, but have it going right.
When Billy was at the University of Florida, I think I've shared this with him before, but I've shared it with others.
Lean in a second there, Scott. I can't quite hear you.
I'm sorry. When Billy was at the University of Florida, I have a dear friend who is a very successful businessman in Jacksonville. He was at one of the games, and I went over to visit with him, and the game was ongoing. And he said to me, he said, I don't know if you realize it, but I watch Coach Donovan. I watch him on the sideline, walking the bench, and just the influence, the impact he has on people watching him is incredible. I watch him interact with even though he's frustrated at a call, I watch him interact with the referees. I watch him interact with his players. And he said, I come away saying, I need to be more like that. So and he gets it, and he does it now. He falls off the log as we all do at times, but he really is having an impact. And when the players realize that he wants the best from them, that he sees the potential in them, that's why he pushes, that's why he demands what he does from them. When they see it, that's when they start really becoming all that God created them to be, on the basketball court and off.
That's good. And Coach, I want to ask you something, but let me stay with Scott for just 1 second. So we talk about, the 4 Ps, and there's clearly, you have built a life. I wouldn't even call it a career, but a life about mentoring people. But what does that look like, especially for a college or professional basketball coach? What are a few things, tangible things, and you've mentioned them, but what are some things like for us that want to do better, or we want to see, people in our sphere of influence, we want to mentor, we want to take them to another place. What are 2 or 3 keys of how you might speak into their life?
Well, one thing you got to realize, it's not about you. It can't be about you. It's got to be about them, and always their best interests, always looking for that. in them. You have to develop, you got to be a listener, and you have to develop a relationship of trust. They need to understand, coaches are funny that way, and men are worse, and all sorts of things we bring to the fold. So we put up these walls in front of us, and it's hard to get past them because until we know who we can trust. Billy got to a place with me. I think folks talk positively about me, but he got to a place with me where he realized that he could let the walls down and share with me whatever, and he could trust me with it because I always wanted the best for him. Wasn't about me, didn't want anything from him. And I think that's important as a mentor. You need to realize if you want to make a difference in this person's life, you, you can't jump into it. You've got to wait. You've got to wait for an opportunity. And they need to believe that you're the one they can share with, and they need to understand that that you want the best for them in that relationship. So that's what I would say. From coaching, from a mentoring standpoint, is a few things: trust, absolute loyalty, of course, in that relationship, and remember, it's not about you. It really is about God. Billy mentioned a minute ago about conversations we have. He is an incredible achiever. I mean, he wants to do well, and moving from when you come to Christ, sometimes people have the idea that we need to be kind of gentle and passive, and we're going to sit in the corner in fetal position, and God will tap us when He's ready for us. That's not so. If God created you, which He did, each one of us, as an achiever, and you now come to Christ and you understand that relationship with Christ, why would He want you to set that aside now that you're doing it with Him? And that's the key, is that He made him. So that's who He needs to be. And now he understands, and other coaches like to understand. They're doing it together for God's glory and for the good of others.
Yeah, exactly. And so Coach Donovan, with that, in that lens and hearing those things and having a guy like Scott in your life, today we get this question so much, even on our other series interviews, but a lot of coaches out there in the college game or wherever they're at in their coaching career, looking to climb the ladder, looking to move here and there, move up. A lot of times coaches will isolate. We're looking out for our career. We're trying to build a brand perhaps, or move up, get a job, recruit here, recruit there. How important is it to have someone like a Scott, a mentor in your life?
Well, obviously it was extremely important to me, just a little bit on my background. So I grew up in a Catholic household. I went to Catholic elementary school, went to a Catholic high school, and I went to a Catholic college. Faith in my house growing up was critically important. My dad, would drive past our church where I grew up, and, we would stop in together, and he would make visits to church, light candles and do things like that. So, for me, that was always something that was instilled in my life at a very young age. I was an altar boy. But I would say as you kind of go through and you're young, you have these different experiences, and sometimes your perception of God isn't what really the Bible is saying. And for me, I needed someone to help me create a little bit more clarity on that. I think that's where Scott, had come in. Tim Maloney's, who a lot of the coaches may know, who worked with me in Florida for a number of years, was another person that really helped me in that area. And really trying to get an understanding, because I think a lot of times in our own mind, we can create what God looks like or who we think God is, or we try to approach it like we're God. So I think, the relationship with Scott, I think the first thing was somebody like Scott is not going to be in a position to help me unless I'm willing to get very, very vulnerable of what I'm really, really struggling with, and I think for me, we had won back-to-back national championships, and, it kind of comes and it goes. And I remember watching something on Tom Brady. I think it was on 60 Minutes. The Patriots had won 3 out of, I think, 5 Super Bowls. And he made a comment like, there's got to be more to life than this. And it kind of always stuck with me when he said it. And, for me, I always felt like to Scott's point, I want to achieve. I'm competitive. I want our teams to be good. At the end, you want the scoreboard to be in your favor, all those kind of things. But I think what happened, and I was very lucky, in my 40s, and I think I was learning and growing and evolving as a person, as a coach, as a husband, a father, as a friend, as we all are in our lives. But I think probably my realities or my perceptions really kind of hit me in the face, after that second national championship of, what is really, okay, we won a championship. Now what? There's another season coming. There's another team coming. There's another group of new players coming. And I think the one thing I always felt like, and it took me a while to get there, but I felt this deep in my heart, I just needed someone to help me get there. And Scott was certainly that person. But I always felt like the national championship trophy or the national championship ring or the Final Four ring was more symbolic of the relationships that were established. And to me, it's always been about, and I really felt this way probably a lot earlier on, there is something incredibly powerful when you have everybody rowing the boat in the same direction, everybody's on the same page. But I think to get everybody on the same page, you have to be willing to have, hard discussions. You've got to be vulnerable. You've got to, work together. You got to basically be able to, I think, have the kind of relationships where you can be open and honest with each other about where you're trying to get to. And I think that the relationship with Scott for me was, I think, first and foremost, I don't think anybody can help another person unless another person is really, really honest. And it's really, really difficult because if you have someone standing in front of you that's trying to help you, but you don't trust them, it's really, really hard to maybe be vulnerable or want to share certain things. And there was no reason for me not to trust Scott, even from the beginning. But as we got to know each other, I was able to, talk to him about, hey, listen, I don't think I'm doing a good enough job here. And, I'm evaluating myself on the result of winning and losing, and him helping me create more clarity on, this is what you're called to do. And, the scoreboard's not going to always read that way. I think sometimes our self-esteem can be established and set in winning, victories, trophies, and it's not necessarily rooted in our faith and who we're created to be as a person. And I think Scott, over the years, just in our relationship, I love talking to him about that. I love learning. I love trying to grow. I love trying to get better. And he has really been, I think, an incredible sounding board for me and has been extremely helpful for me. And obviously we've built a close relationship, and I obviously trust him, dearly. But I also really feel like for all of ourselves, when we're in a competitive environment, like at the end of the day, you may look back up on the trophies, but to me, what's more powerful, I always felt this, what does a player say to their grandkids about you as a coach? Because, if I ask somebody, hey, who won the Tour de France 5 years ago? Who was the Heisman Trophy 5 years ago? Who won the Super Bowl 10 years ago? Who won the NCAA championship 15 years ago? Either you have to look it up or you have to stop, you'd have to pause, you'd have to think about that. But if I said to you, who was your favorite teacher? It would probably come right to mind right away. Or who was a person that really impacted you in your life? It would happen right away. So, you can on one hand be really, really, really successful and maybe win a lot of games, but you also could be in a situation where maybe, and not every player is going to love playing for every coach. I understand that. And maybe they get over. One of the most powerful things that happened to me last week, I had a player I coached at Marshall. It was my first head coaching job. And he called me, and we keep in touch. And this was like really powerful to me. I think this is something that coaches have to understand. He called me, and we had talked periodically, but he kind of just opened up his heart a little bit. Now, this guy was a pain in the neck to coach. He didn't get anywhere where he should have gotten to. He never reached his potential. He totally underachieved. There was part of me that felt like as a coach, I didn't do a good enough job reaching him. All those kind of things I said, to myself dealing with him. And inevitably 2 years later, I left and I went to Florida, right? But during this stretch with him, I was not getting to him at all. And I wasn't making a difference at all. So he's probably now in his early 40s. And he said to me, Coach, I just want to let you know, that I totally underachieved as a player for you. I totally missed the opportunity on the lessons you were trying to teach, and I should have been so much better. He said, but I'm 40 years old right now, and the things that you talked to me about when I was 18, 19, 20, I'm still carrying that on now. So the challenge, I think, in coaching is if we're to plant good seeds in young people and we're trying to coach them and help them, we have to understand that that seed may not flourish and benefit you. That seed may flourish later on in their life. And you got to be okay as a coach that in that moment in time, you didn't get to him. Maybe he didn't help the team like he could have been. Maybe he created a lot of heartache for you. But I look at now just reinforcing to me even more that, yes, he didn't get it when he was 19 and 20, but now he's got it when he's 40. And he's talking about some of the things that he went through at Marshall, how he's incorporated those things in his life and the discipline that he now tries to live with. He just got it a little bit later. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think for us as coaches, we know we got this talented player and we want to get them to this place because we know he can be a really good player. He can have a great career, a great future. And you see as a coach, he's wasting his talent. That's heartbreaking and that's difficult to swallow. And we all internalize like, what am I not doing getting to this guy? I can't get him where I want to get him to. But we also have to understand that if we're instilling the right things and we're talking about the right things, we have to be okay that they may get it later than we wanted them to.
That's so good. So many good nuggets in there. God, yes.
Yeah, thank you. And Billy, I remember Billy a number of years ago was to pick up on something he said early in his comments there. He was interviewed by a sports writer about various things. And as I recall it, Billy, and you can correct me, one of the questions the sports writer asked him was, look, you won the national championship in 2006, you won it in 2007, but you haven't won it since. You've been there, Final Four, you've been there, Sweet 16, Elite Eight, et cetera, but you haven't won it again. Isn't that what you want to do? Billy's response was classic him. He said, absolutely. I would love to be standing there and holding that national championship trophy again. But if I look back at how I got there along the journey and look back and see people that I could have made a difference in their lives and didn't, just so I could hold this trophy, what have I done? He said, it's all about the journey. It's all about making a difference in the lives as we go along the way. That's what he does. And I say that for all of us in life, but it coaches those players you have in front of you. And he just talked to that. One other thing I wanted to say about, you asked a minute ago at the mentoring aspect is so many of these guys on the line, you coaches on the line, I know this, and Billy was one. They're such high profile positions. There are places where almost they've got to get it perfect. They've got to have it right. And I don't mean wins and losses, but nothing can go wrong in their life. And if it does, who do they turn to? They really often don't have anybody they can turn to share struggles or things with. And that's critical. That to me is a critical part. But you got to earn that right for them to talk. They've got to know they can trust you. Thanks.
So good. So good. And Billy, I got to say this. You did a couple things with your Marshall story. Number one, Roger Adams, who is listening, by the way, is beaming, I'm sure of it. He'll be uncontrollable, at our next staff meeting. He'll be bragging so much. But you talked about planting those seeds and how critical that is. And you're right, we don't always see the fruit, but someone's going to see that fruit eventually. And that's the humility that comes with being a leader too. And Reverend Billy Graham, the famous quote that we hang our hat on as we serve coaches around the country, that a coach will impact more people in 1 year than most people will in a lifetime. I mean, we're doing that, as coaches, and that's the platform, that's the role that we walk in each day. So really, really good.
I would also say too, I've been very, very blessed, from my parents to my coaches, but, even early on, we're talking about the relationship Scott and I have, and I equally have an unbelievable relationship with Roger. And, he's come to me to try to help, other coaches, and he's come with me with great ideas. Roger, was the pastor of our team when I was at Marshall. And I think he would attest that, he and I had some really good, deep discussions. And I always appreciated him sharing his stories and things that he went through. But, you know, like Roger couldn't necessarily help me unless I really was able to articulate what I was struggling with or what I wanted answers on or what I wanted some direction on, understanding on. And I think so much for a coach, you get caught in between this incredible whirlwind that I think the thing that you want to be striving for is truth, you know, and I mean, even, you know, truth about yourself, because, you know, there's times where I've thought I've done a really, really poor job in a certain area and maybe hadn't done a poor job. It was just how I was internalizing it. It probably wasn't the truth. And I think sometimes we create truths in our minds, and you know what happens is those truths get shattered because what you believe and how you know, compartmentalize things that happen in your life may not necessarily be the truth. And I think getting to the truth is critical.
That's good. Absolutely. You know, we're running a little bit out of time. We've got a few minutes left, but we do want to get to a few questions from coaches. And coaches, let me remind you, in the time we do have left, feel free, use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Love to hear from you. You know, just chime in. But here's a great question from a coach. What has been helpful for you in building relationships with those players that you don't naturally connect with? Coach, why don't you take that? And then Scott, you may find that as well, like as in your mentoring and relationship building. Maybe you don't have a lot of things in common, but what are some ways that you've been able to do that and build relationships with players?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the vulnerability piece. Generally, I think that any person would say in a relationship where there's a coach and a player, I think a lot of times that is predicated on a player. If you're willing to, as a coach, try to help where maybe the player doesn't trust, or there's been a breakdown of trust, or there's walls up, or whatever it is, you know, I think that that's something you have to keep pushing at and trying to crack. I do think in a lot of ways that players that do that, where there is like a significant lack of trust, there is a significant lack of vulnerability, they need to understand as players, those things are inevitably going to be stumbling blocks for them to reach their potential and get where they want to get to as a player. And we all have things that hold us back. You know, we all have these things in our life that are not allowing us to become all we can become. And I think, and that goes for coaches too, you know, there's things I'm always trying to work on that I know I need to get better at. I think for a player that you're not connecting with, or, you know, it's maybe hard to get to or relate to or connect with, I would say that it's definitely worth, you know, the time and the energy to get through that, because I think those are the ones that you can really make an incredible impact on and really build a relationship that would be really, really special. But obviously it's going to take time. And I think sometimes it starts with the coach being the one that's vulnerable and being the one that's really honest, instead of having a young man feel like he's got to kind of like spill his heart and provide information, and the coach is not necessarily doing that. I think the vulnerability part, the communication, all that stuff, the honesty, you know, all those things, I think comes down to the coach really creating a platform that they can do that.
Good.
Yeah,
Scott?
let me pick up on what Billy said about being vulnerable. I mean, if you think back in your own life at the people that you remember what they said, it's those that have been honest with you, that kind of opened themselves up and shared out of their own life experiences. Those connections are important. And so if you expect to get to a place with somebody where they'll listen to you, you've got to be honest with them. You've got to be open and vulnerable. The other thing I would add is that sometimes we tend to, and guys tend to do this. I mean, even our marriages, think about it. We the player, whomever is in front of you, doesn't necessarily want to know the answer that you think you have. They maybe just want you to listen, to start with. Listen. And listening involves, as Billy said a minute ago, also being vulnerable yourself, listening. You may have the answer. You may have the right direction for them, but maybe that's not the right time. Maybe they just need to listen. There will come a time, though, when they believe, when they know they can trust you, that you're listening to them, that you care about them is the key. That they're going to start opening it up to you. That's what I believe in seeing in any relationship.
Yeah. I can, as I'm hearing you, as I'm listening to that very thing, I'm thinking about all the areas in my life, the platforms that I have where that helped me be a little bit better today. In everything I'm doing, kids, certainly my wife, job, all those kind of things.
Well,
Wow,
they're both
platform.
very, very patient ladies, so we understand that in our relationship.
There you go. That's good. One more question. And again, Billy, please give us some insight, but also Scott, jump in there too. What are some things, some specific things, if you look back over the course of your relationship, what were some specific things, excuse me, that Scott did for you on a weekly basis as that relationship was growing? Was it a weekly visit or a phone call, or what are some things he did for you to grow that?
Well, I think Scott, first and foremost, was around practice a lot. I let people come into practice. I wasn't opposed to just always closing down the gym. So Scott was around. He would stop up into the office. Clearly, if there was things that were on my mind that I was concerned about, I would go to him. I'd even talk to him about a player situation potentially sometime, like I'm having a hard time here, and what would be the best way. So I've kind of used him as a resource that way. But I would say that, pretty consistent Bible studies, during the course of the year, pretty consistent Bible studies, before every game, whether it's through phone or sitting down. And I think the one thing that Scott did a remarkable job is for me is I think I could always tell that he gave great preparation in terms of trying to help me or mentor me or help me grow spiritually as a person. But he would always say to me, okay, this is what we're going to talk about today. Is that okay with you? And I always say to him, you always get it right. He knows me, so he knows the things to use that are going to impact me. So because of our relationship, he knows where I would at. So if we were having a conversation before a game or having a conversation, in the middle of the week, he would have an idea of maybe what I was dealing with. And he would really, I think, force me to think. I think the best thing a mentor can do, or someone that's trying to help another person, the best thing they can do is make them think. And I think to Scott's point, it's not necessarily providing the answers as much as it's to provoke personal thought. How well can I make him think about this stuff and have to really, really dwell on something like that? And, I think Scott put a lot of different things on my brain that I could think about in my own life that I needed to continue to grow and get better at.
Love it. Provoke personal thought. It's good. Scott, any comment on that? Does that sound right?
It does. And in the process of doing that, I learned a lot too in preparation, but we never, our devotional time never was about what to do to win a game. It was always about what he was going through. It was points I thought could help him. I remember we went through a number of different things, scriptures, 23rd Psalm one time in detail. And then we went back through it at times because it's packed with things that we can embrace, that we can walk through. And there. So yeah, I got to know him. I often knew what was happening in him, maybe before he did. And so I always tried to make sure when we left each other, he was lifted. And as a result of it, I was lifted, the process, and now we do before the season put on pause. At the NBA, we do devotional before almost every game and pray together before every game. He just called me when he's ready after all the media circus before the games.
Absolutely. One question on that thought, Coach, as you are, it would appear you're about to restart the season, and probably with a sense of urgency. Formats, obviously, it's a completely different environment than anybody's used to or ever been a part of, and there'll be a sense of urgency to it as well. But what does your leadership look like? What are some things you've kind of prepared yourself for to be able to communicate to your team as you head into the next few weeks and months to wrap up the season?
Well, we've been doing Zoom calls once a week with our players, and reaching out throughout the course of the week, keeping in touch with guys. I think we all know what the challenges are, right? Going away, being in a bubble in Orlando. For the two teams competing for an NBA championship, it's going to be 3 months kind of, so to speak, I don't want to say complete isolation, but certainly there's going to be some things that we're going to have to do. Not everybody in your organization is able to travel. Where are guys at physically? Because this is different than some lockout years where the lockout took place and guys could go play. There was a period of time where guys didn't have the resources to go anywhere. What about the mental health challenges of being away for all that time? How do you get back to creating that identity and cohesiveness that you had before the season came to a stop? All these things are things that we know as coaches, everybody knows you're going to be confronted with. And because you've never gone through it before, there's not anything to refer back to, where you would probably, if God forbid, if this happened again next year and the same exact scenario happened, you'd probably have a lot better answers next year than you do this year, because you would have gone through it. You would have learned something. We're going through something that nobody's really gone through. So everybody's doing what they feel is best for their team at this point in time. But certainly I think everybody's going to be challenged in a different way. Think about the coaching staff. I mean, for me, I try to work out every day, the day of a game. I try to do that as consistently as I can. I generally feel better going into a game after I work out. Well, I know I can't go down and use the physical fitness center in a hotel. So, how do you work out? How do you do those kind of things? We have staff meetings, before every game, every practice, and now we've got to socially distance. What does that look like? How can we be productive? We cannot now bring everybody on our staff to Orlando. How do you keep them engaged through Zoom calls in your staff meetings? So all these things are out there that you're thinking about having to do, but we're all going through it for the first time. And it's not only the players, it's coaches, it's everybody.
That's good. And I would think, in fact, I know, people, like you said, you've mentioned it, Scott, many times, people are going to be watching. They're going to be watching how well we lead and those kind of things. So we're wrapping up our time, but any final thoughts, Scott, for the coaches that are, certainly we've got coaches online here with the webinar, but also watching YouTube live as well as they may catch it later. Final thoughts for our coaches and people that might catch it?
Thank you. Excuse me. One thing Billy mentioned earlier in one of his comments, and it's encapsulated in a word that I want to leave with folks, and it's about surrender. And I always talk to this a lot about with men in different ways, but we need to get to a place. I would encourage all of us to try and get to a place where, I said it before, it's not about us, but about surrendering. And for me and for Billy and for you guys, you understand it's surrendering to God's will in our lives. We think we do it, and we do it a little bit, and we think we're doing it, but guys are notorious for not really fully getting there. And I think when we do, we get to a place where God can really use us in all the gifts and abilities, that purpose, potential, passion, platform that He's built into us to make a difference in this world around us. The other thing I would just encourage folks, if they'd like to, the thoughts and the podcast, if they want to look at the impactforliving.com website, they can get there and they can connect with those and listen to those or watch, or if there's anything we can do for them, just yell. They can send us an email. It's been great, Ted and Billy.
Absolutely.
As always, I'm glad these guys got to hear you in this context.
Coach, a final word for our coaches that are listening in?
Yeah, I'm just grateful for what Nations of Coaches is doing. Roger and I had talked about this years and years ago about, how to help coaches. I think that for coaches, like Scott had mentioned, when you're, in a position where it's hard to have somebody that can identify with what you're doing on a regular basis with your team, and maybe there's some other coaches you feel comfortable talking about, I would suggest trying to find somebody that you really feel comfortable talking to that can help and stay involved and continue to help you grow. I think that that's really, really important because, you have to deal with a lot. Everybody's got their families. You got 15 players. You're dealing with, managers. You're dealing with administrations. You're dealing with so many different things. And at a time, as a coach, and Scott said this, you're trying to serve and you're trying to do the best job you can for your team and for your players and for the people around the program. But also at the same point too, you can't be effective at what you're doing unless you're really at a good place in your whole. And we're human, so we're not going to be whole all the time, and we're going to need to find ways that we can continue to keep ourselves in a good place so we can impact the people around us in a good way.
So good, Coach. I really cannot say it any better than Coach Donovan just did, but at Nations of Coaches, we call that a character coach. That's a Scott Whitaker for our guys, and we can help you find those. So this is the time, reach out. We'd be glad to serve coaches any way we can, but that's what we do here. We help place character coaches, people like a Scott Whitaker. We do our best to go out and find guys like him, although very tough to find, very tough to fill his shoes. But we find those Roger Adams, those Scott Whitakers, and we help coaches and help the character coach come alongside that team and serve the coach, the staff, the players well. It's what we do. So coaches out there that are hearing us, both on the call here as well as YouTube Live, reach out, and we'll help you today. Well, I tell you what, this has been an incredible series. It's been an incredible visit with Scott and Coach Donovan. We can't thank you enough for joining us today. And as we sign off here, we want to thank certainly the coaches that were able to register and be with us these past 4 weeks. Everybody out there that's watching via YouTube, we certainly say thank you. And again, thank you to you gentlemen, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you do. Keep doing it.